broadcast today on July 3rd, 2024, which is a Tuesday. And welcoming those of you here. Is it a Tuesday or Wednesday, George?
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Yes.
I got to get my act together here. So welcome on July 3rd. The 4th is tomorrow, which is Thursday. Okay. 2024. Amen. And I have Brother George Widger with us today as he's going to continue on with his exposing Jesuit Coadjutors wherever they turn up their horrible, terrible influences. So, Brother George, welcome to the broadcast here with Brother Eric John Phelps, 24/7 World Radio.
Well, thank you, Brother Eric. As always, it's a pleasure to be on with you. And yes, I do have my water, and I need that today because it's hot out here.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of warm here today, too, so I guess I need to get a glass. So, all right, Brother George, so go ahead and you can begin and take off with the topics that you had. There was one I wanted to contribute to, but go ahead.
Okay, so my scripture verse is 1 Peter. Okay, I have 1 Peter 5, verse 13. 1 Peter 5, verse 1-3. It says, "The church that is in Babylon, elected together with you, saluted you, and so doth Marcus my son." Okay. I remember this was like 25 years ago, or well, like 1999, 2000, so about the turn of the 21st century. I read Dave Hunt's "A Woman Rises the Beast," which came out in 1994. And it was Dave's response to ECT, Evangelicals and Catholics Together, which came out 30 years ago, 1994. And anyhow, I know we've spoken about the late Dave Hunt before. And according to Hunt, according to Catholic apologist Carl Keating, Babylon has always been a code word for ancient Rome. This is according to Carl Keating. Now, I'm not sure what his source is for that. And so Catholics will say, see, this is further proof that Simon Peter was in Rome, because he had to use cryptic language in order to basically hide his identity. So he couldn't say that he was in Rome, Italy, so that's why he changed it to Babylon. What's your response to that?
I maintain he's talking about the saints in Babylon. Babylon was inhabited, and so it's not Rome. It's actual Babylon. It wasn't destroyed. There were still people living in it, and so Babylon will become a place where the Jews will live, and they will write their Babylonian Talmud from there in the 5th century. So I maintain there were believers, Jewish believers in the city of Babylon at that time. Although Rome is Mystery Babylon the Great, Revelation 17. And of course, Carl Keating was a professional liar. We all know that the grave of Peter was discovered in 1953 by Franciscans in Jerusalem. So that's a fact. So anyhow, Peter never went to Rome. He died in Jerusalem. He was an apostle to the Jews, to the circumcision, along with James. So, but I maintain Babylon was an actual place, and it's the old ancient Babylon where there were believers there at the time in the 1st century.
Okay, so something you mentioned when you just signed on, is there something you wanted to address? You can bring it up now if you like.
You know, I saw your list, and I don't have it in front of me right now, but I said, oh, this looks interesting, and so let me see if I can find it here. What are you covering today, Brother George?
Well, it should be on that list, but although I often will deviate from it, I'll usually have a list of topics, and I'll do about half because we get distracted. But one of the things I did want to bring up was this whole debacle that took place last Thursday, I guess the 27th, between Donald John Trump and Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., the 45th and the 46th U.S. presidents, respectively. And okay, I'll try to keep this family friendly, but man, it was I'll put it polite, it was a clown show. Yes, it was others would say it was another type of clown show and a train wreck. But it was
Trump was told to control himself, which I thought he did a pretty good job, and it's degenerated into ad hominem attacks, especially on the part of Biden. And whenever I debate, if anybody attacks me personally for an ad hominem attack, I win, you lose, and the debate's over. That's any real groundwork of a true debate. You never attack each other personally. You deal with topics and you defend what you propose, or you attack what the opponent's proposing, but you never attack them. That's completely outside the proper framework of a debate, and that's what they did.
Well, this was actually before my time, but I've actually seen the famous Nixon-Kennedy debate of 1960. Now, I realize they were both thoroughly controlled, and I'm not going to, but at least they feigned civility. They had a certain sense of decorum, and they're both very articulate. Now, most people said that who heard the debate on the radio thought that Nixon won, but things working against him. He's not Richard Nixon was not very telegenic. In that he looked tired, his eyes were puffy, he had 5 o'clock shadow, and he just didn't look very good on television. Whereas
Nixon was nothing compared to Kennedy in Kennedy's ability to speak and his rhetoric and his delivery. Nothing like him. Absolutely inferior. But as you said, both were controlled, and as the Jesuits controlled both sides of every agitation and have for the last 200 years or so, so it is the Democratic Republican Party. So it is today with Biden and Trump. They control them both, designing a certain outcome that they want to bring to pass. I think that would be the important topic. What's the outcome they want from such a kindergarten, childish display of what they call the debate?
Okay,
as well as the genuine agitation and animosity that white feminist had for Trump and the other guys. So these CNN people hate Trump, and you should have people that put the questions to the debaters that they have to have some sort of neutral ground as to those individuals, because if they have animosity, that's going to show in their questioning. So that was not fair either.
Okay, and by the way, both Nixon and Kennedy were considerably younger. John F. Kennedy was 47 or was 43, and Nixon was 47. Whereas what just happened the other day, Donald Trump is 78 and Joe Biden is 81. So, relatively speaking, Nixon and Kennedy were whippersnappers as juxtaposed to who was out there last week. However, so you're talking about the Kennedy-Nixon debate, which took place almost 64 years ago, September the 26th, 1960. I just had to go look up the dates. And that was just, roughly 5-6 weeks before the election. And whereas this debate took place more than 4 months before the election. As a matter of fact, the respective parties haven't even had their conventions yet. The Democrats are supposed to be having theirs, on August the 19th or the 22nd, so next month, and in Chicago, and the Republicans in a few weeks in Milwaukee. So they're both going to be on both their respective conventions are going to be on Lake Michigan. And this is the earliest they've ever had a presidential debate. And, seems odd, to say the least.
Well, it just continues the agitation. Continues the agitation of the people that are conservative and want to conserve their wealth and want to have a civilization that's historically white and English speaking. And there are blacks that English speak, of course, and they want to preserve somewhat of their civilization, the decent blacks, the minority civil blacks, and many of them are Baptists. But now, when you let all these alien Hispanic Roman Catholic invaders in here, and in the millions, you're changing the country. It's no longer the United States. It's another country. And that's what the Jesuit-run CNN wants, and that's what Jesuit Fox News wants. I mean, they all want this. On one hand, if they don't have their new right coming to power and we have more socialist communism, then the Jesuits always enjoy communism for the destruction of the white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, and Baptist middle class. But if it goes into the new right, which I maintain that's where they're going, then we'll have the new right, ultramontane, over the mountain, Jesuit quasi-fascism, which then they can center their new capital in Denver, and they can have their roundups throughout the country. And the average middle-class citizen will be all for it. But what they don't know is the roundups are going to take all these Hispanics and take them to the concentration camps. And the big one is in Anchorage, Alaska, which is about 1 million acres of that FEMA death camp. So all these alien Hispanics coming in here are all doomed. But nobody wants to tell them that. Just keep on coming up here. And the governments where they come from, they don't want them back. So it's all a big setup by the Jesuits and what they intend to do. They didn't make a mistake when they set up their FEMA death camps under Ronald Reagan and Oliver North, those Knights of Malta back in the 80s. They're going to use those camps. And they're going to be for the tens of millions of illegal invaders brought here by this government in District of Columbia, paid for by District of Columbia and their treasury, to bring these elements in here to justify new right martial law and to send them all to the camps. And the South American countries hate them. They're the low-cultured people of those countries. They want them to go to the camps too. Mexico doesn't want them back. So we have to look at the design of what the Jesuits are doing here and look beyond the futility of the quote-unquote debate, which evidently Trump has won, and more people have gone into his camp, which is exactly what the Jesuits want.
Okay, so now, as I said, I made reference to the Nixon-Kennedy debate, which was the first televised debate. But as I said, I realized it was all Jesuitical theater because both of them were the Vatican's boys. I mean, John F. Kennedy.
And the Vatican runs MSNBC. The Vatican runs those two hosts that were on there. I forget their names. So it's
Jake
completely. Who's that? Jake Tapper. And
correct.
And that woman, what's her name?
I forgot. But I guess Chris Wallace wasn't available, so they had to. So they swapped out.
Chris Wallace, the Masonic Jew, wasn't available, so they settled for some other secret society boys and girls. So yeah. Mm-hmm. With their slated questions, I wish I would have been able just to ask some questions. That would have been lots of fun. But just controlled questioning, controlled answers. It's a performance. American people went into the arms of Trump. Biden, maybe some had felt sorry for him with all his stuttering and ad hominem attacks on Trump. And it was just a mess. So endgame being to decide to further the quest of Trump. And of course, I guess Trump just had a recent Supreme Court decision that was in his favor. And as I'm saying, he's going to run for president. And if that's going to happen, that this felonies have to be removed from the record. Otherwise, he can't run. So we'll see what they do.
Well, so I was curious. What sort of was at least one question you would have asked if you were the moderator?
Well, the first question I would ask is, do you believe that the Roman Catholic institution has the right to run this country? Do you believe that the Pope has the right to rule this nation under the doctrine of the temporal power? That's the first question I'd ask. And what I mean, ladies and gentlemen, is I mean the Pope using his various Roman hierarchy here, as well as the Jesuit order that has 28 standing major universities in this country, and 4 provincials. Do you think they have the right to rule this country through the Council on Foreign Relations? Next question would be, and Mr. Biden, President Biden, could you tell us about your membership in the Council on Foreign Relations? Just what's that organization about? And Mr. Trump, what's your relationship to the Archbishop of New York City? Because, you and your father, Mr. Trump, used to go to the annual Al Smith dinner with the Archbishop. So what's your position on whether the Archbishop should have anything to do with running the country? Because we know the Archbishop of New York oversees the Council on Foreign Relations. Mr. Trump, do you have anything to say about that? In other words, I would ask them a series of pointed questions that point to conspiracy to run this country into the ground and destroy it. And my question is, are you guys all for this? Are you participating in this? And don't call me a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy factualist. As the facts that I have validate the conclusion there is a papal conspiracy afoot to ruin this country. And are you for this or are you against it? Will you be nationalistic, that the nationalism was born out of the Great Treaty of Westphalia, ending the 30 Years' War in 1648 when nations were born, and patriotism and nationalism? Are you for the destruction of what's left of the Treaty of Westphalia? And there'll be no more nationalism and no more borders in the Matrix movie and Charlie Chaplin. No more borders, and we can all have one world of one race mixed, one people mixed world. Is that what you want, or do you want nations to be sustained? Because if you don't want this nation to be sustained, that means you're a traitor. There is such thing as treason, because the Bible talks about, in the last time, perilous times shall arise, men shall be lovers of themselves, heady, high-minded, traitors. Do you believe in treason? Is it possible to commit treason? How about letting all these aliens in here by the millions and paying for it, giving them $1,500 each and a cell phone? You think that's treason on the part of this military government of Washington to do this? And if it is, who's doing it? And if they are doing it, should not the Justice Department prosecute them? But then again, who runs the Justice Department? Does the Jesuits at Georgetown, do they run the Justice Department with their graduates, their U.S. attorneys? Huh? Are they the ones really running things? So that's why we don't have any real prosecution of real traitors. There's a whole bunch of questions that could have been asked, one after another after another. And I would make sure I asked them. Of course, they'd probably escort me out and then beat me a little bit before they kick me off the premises. But those are the kinds of questions that need to be asked. Are you still planning on rounding up 21 million Negroes, send them to camps? Because that's what was brought out in the Iran-Contra affair, when it was brought out that 21 million Negroes were going to be rounded up and sent to FEMA camps. Is that still in the making here?
Well, gee, brother, that sounds like an unfounded conspiracy theory to me.
Yeah, even though that's what they said in the Iran-Contra hearing.
Well,
so these are facts that they don't want the people to remember, and of course that's why they have their programming on their TVs. They want to program you to think a certain way and to ignore all the other facts that have surfaced over the last 10, 15, 20 years, and have the people forget about it. So we can just fight over Biden and Trump, and the end game is the same. They both serve the Pope.
And of course, so if you'll forgive the cliche, is divide and conquer. Is Coke or Pepsi? So which Freemasonic sexual deviant pervert do you want to vote for?
Yeah. And worse than all that is their allegiance is to the sovereign state of Vatican City, run by a king whose name is the King of Rome, going by the religious title of Pope. He also goes by the title of Emperor. I am Emperor. So that's the issue. Do we have allegiance to our government, our written constitution? Oh, and that's another question I'd ask. Mr. Trump, do you think we should keep our emergency war powers military government in place? It's been here since March 9th, 1933, imposed by Franklin Damnable Roosevelt. Should we keep military government in place? I mean, you know that, don't you, Mr. Trump? You realize that all the courtrooms in the country, state and federal, are having military colors on display. I was just in a courtroom yesterday in Lancaster County watching a series of, it wasn't a trials, but it was sentencing. And there they have the United States flag trimmed in gold fringe with the eagle on top. And they have the state flag of Pennsylvania trimmed in gold fringe with a spear on top. And that's in every state court in Pennsylvania. So now, should we continue to have military due process of law in the state courts here or in the federal courts, or should we do away with that, Mr. Trump? Should we get back to civilian due process of law protected by Section 1 of the 14th Amendment that can punish crime? You think we should get back to a civilian government, or do you think we should just keep on with this emergency war powers military government? Let's see what he says. Well, what do you mean? Well, are you familiar with Trading with the Enemy Act? Oh, yeah, I guess I am. Do you realize those proclamations 2039 and 2040 were promulgated by the president based on Trading with the Enemy Act? Do you realize that? Oh, Trading with the Enemy Act, that had to be repealed after World War I. Oh, no, it wasn't. It was amended 14 times from 1918 to 1930, getting it fashioned just perfectly for 1933, for March 9th, 1933. And Trading with the Enemy Act was never repealed because guess what? World War I never ended. It was just an armistice. And so therefore, based on Trading with the Enemy Act, now they're going to pass the Emergency Banking Relief Act on the same day, March 9th, 1933, and they're going to make these proclamations good forever until some president comes around with a termination proclamation. So that would be my question. So, Mr. Trump, if you are selected to be president, because we know there's no elections, if you are selected to be president, will you terminate proclamations 2039 and 2040? Will they termination proclamation? Will you do that? Because if you do that, Mr. Trump, you will end emergency war powers military government right now. So are you willing to do that? That would be a big question.
Okay, so if you're allowed to do that, they say, well, I'm sure your mic would have technical problems. Oh, I'm sorry, we must have had a power outage. Oh, we'll get you back in the air as soon as we fix these technical problems.
I had a friend in New York, George. His name was Chris Strunk. I think he was killed a couple years ago. Nobody knows how he died. And he ran for president on one platform. Repeal or terminate proclamations 2039 and 2040. And the Congress would repeal the Emergency Banking Relief Act. Even if Congress, that's all that would need to be done, repeal the Emergency Banking Relief Act of March 9, 1933. Now, therefore, the proclamations are no more approved and confirmed, so the proclamations fall away. And when Trading with the Enemy Act, when that's not augmented by the Emergency Banking Relief Act, Trading with the Enemy Act is not inside the country anymore. And if Trading with the Enemy Act is not inside the country anymore, why the military jurisdiction given to the federal district courts out of Trading with the Enemy Act, why then that just disappears. And the military jurisdiction of all these federal courts and state courts just disappear. That's what happens when you would terminate or repeal Emergency Banking Relief Act and the Trading with the Enemy Act. Get rid of those two damnable things. Are you willing to do that, Mr. Biden? Of course not. I've been serving the Jesuits for years. I had the Jesuit at my inauguration, Leo J. O'Donovan. He was the head of Georgetown University. No, they know who I serve. One day, the American people just might wake up and realize we've been played for suckers, that the Jesuits have run this place for 91 years. They use us, our blood and treasure, to wage war around the world for the benefit of the Pope. So I would ask that question, Mr. Biden, are you willing to call back all the troops garrisoned overseas and shut down all the bases, or at least leave those bases to those countries that we build them for, and bring back our military so we can protect our borders and have a nation once again? Are you willing to do that? Because remember, they can only garrison troops overseas based on the Emergency Banking Relief Act. Yep. And the Proclamation 2040.
Well,
so yep.
I'm sorry, do you mind if I respond to a couple of your points?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. So
but be careful, George. I might start insulting you and give you an ad hominem attack. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I probably deserve it. But anyhow, you made reference to the 27 or 28 Jesuitical universities that are in the U.S. Now, there's two types of schools in anywhere in the world. The ones the Jesuits run openly, and those they run secretly.
Yes, sir.
Another example of one school they run secretly is Columbia in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Case in point, the provost there is Angela Olento, who was born July the 19th, 1961. So just for clarification, universities will usually have two different figures, the president and the provost, and there's some variations. Sometimes they'll call them chancellors, but the president is basically the figurehead. He goes to ribbon cutting ceremonies and he gives speeches, and the provost is the one who actually runs the school. He's in charge, or in this case, she is in charge of the day-to-day affairs. Now, Olento, so she is 61, almost.
She's Hispanic, right?
She's
Hispanic, and she's a Roman Catholic. Okay. And what else?
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I need to provide the receipts for that. She's 61, almost 62, almost 63 years old. She got her undergrad degree in physics from Pontifical Universidad Católica, the Catholic Pontifical University in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
Uh-huh. In the Jesuit Kingdom of Brazil, at Rio de Janeiro, their commercial capital there.
Correct. Now, I'm not sure how long they've run Columbia, but they run it, University of Columbia, they run the country of Columbia, but I'm talking about Columbia University. But they openly run it now. Just as I mentioned, the president of Duke University, shoot, sorry, I need to drink some water.
You need a drink of water, George. I'll get one too.
Oh, okay.
We'll drink to that, George. Okay.
Right. I mentioned last week that Vince Price, not to be confused with the actor Vincent Price, is the president of Duke University in North Carolina, and he got his undergrad degree from Santa Clara University, which is one of the.
Goody.
And so
it's another good Jesuit stooge. They have their graduates, and then they put them in their places of power within their empire. And that's how it works, folks. All the graduates of Jesuit universities are placed within the order's empire wherever they need them. That's how you run an empire. Go ahead, George.
Okay, so to give you another example of how they run, so that was an example of how they run academia, ostensibly non-Catholic academia. Another way is through the news media. Are you familiar with Dana Milbank?
Who's that, George?
Dana Milbank. He's an author and he's a columnist for the Washington Post.
No, I'm not.
Okay,
but I know Washington Post is in the Council on Foreign Relations, so I'm sure they're going to be puppeting the party line of the papacy, which is always socialist, communism, anti-white, pro-black, pro-alien invader, pro-feminist, pro-homosexual, pro-sex perverts, and you name it. So that's what he's going to be.
Okay, so Dana Timothy Milbank is 56 years old. He was born on April 27th, 1968. He got his undergrad degree from Yale University, where he was a member of Skull and Bones. So he would have been 92, if I'm not mistaken. He would have graduated. No, I'm sorry. He would have been 1990. Skull and Bones.
So he's Skull and Bones. That means the Jesuits are going to use him somewhere in their empire, like they use all the bonesmen.
Okay, so
the Jesuits. Remember, when you go into Skull and Bones, you get to kiss the slippered toe of the Pope as part of the initiation in Skull and Bones.
Okay, so he's allowed to play the role of a conservative because he's written books about a number of prominent politicians, including Al Gore, George W. Bush, Glenn Beck. So just to let you know who he is. Now, as I said, he's a columnist. His day job is he's a writer for the Washington Post. Now,
that was Catherine Graham's newspaper, right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. And her father was Meyer. He was a Jewish individual. George Meyer, Herbert Meyer. Anyway, he was the one behind the Emergency Banking Relief Act, and I have him in my class that I teach. And very sinister individual, and CFR, Masonic Jew. Yeah, yeah. I'll look it up while you're talking. Go ahead.
Okay, so so as I said, that that was my point on Dana Milbank. Now, as I said, he's like one of the few Jews who's allowed to play the role of conservative, but he's just simply playing the part.
Yeah, of course, that's what all these Jews do. They're all playing the part for the papacy. They're not at all interested in their own people or having their own country or doing the right thing. They've sold out to mammon, they've sold out to money, and it's all that matters to them. So as long as they're getting paid to betray their own people, everything's good.
Well, and so I thought I'd bring him up. Now, do you remember last week we spoke about the deaths of Frank Andrews, Lieutenant General Frank Andrews, who was killed in a plane crash in Iceland in May of 1943. Was it May the 6th?
Oh, yes, I remember.
Okay, so now, according to Henry Hap Arnold, it was a fait accompli that Andrews was probably going to be named Supreme Allied Leader, but he had this little mishap, and so that opened up a slot for Dwight Eisenhower.
Dwight Eisenhower, that was promoted to that over some 220 other generals that rightfully had superior right to that position. Yeah, Eisenhower was a total fraud, and there is a book called I Don't Like Ike. I recommend it. And then there's a book written by the John Birch Society called The Politician, which completely shows the treason of Eisenhower during World War II. Now, this guy named that I mentioned, George Eugene Isaac Myers, 1875 to 1959. He was the first president of the World Bank Group, June 1946 to December 1946, fifth chair of the Federal Reserve, and he was a member of the Federal Reserve Board, 1930 to 33, and father of Dame of Malta Catherine Graham, owner of the Washington Post. So Eugene Isaac Myers was this Masonic Jew, very much involved in imposing military government with the Emergency Banking Relief Act, and his daughter ran the Washington Post, and of course she was a Dame of Malta.
Okay, so as I said, we talked about Andrews as Frank Andrews last week, and as a matter of fact, Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland is named in his honor. Funny, they kill these people and then they lionize them with a statue or a police.
That's exactly right. That's just the power that they have. We'll use them, but then we'll kill them, and then we'll make a statue. It's like King, like Martin Lucifer King. We'll use King to bring socialist communism among the blacks and forced race mixing and miscegenation. And then after we use him, then we'll kill him there in Memphis and make a god out of him and name schools after him and streets after him. But he served our purposes, Boule Society member that he was, and Black Freemason that he was. And as after we used him, then we killed him, then we glorified him.
Okay, so hence the Kennedy Center did. They renamed Cape Canaveral to Cape Kennedy in Florida. You have as I said, the Kennedy Center, and and so what? And well, anyhow, so I like to bring up a different flag officer, a senior level officer who died under mysterious circumstances, and this was Millard Harmon, Lieutenant General, or okay, we say Lieutenant in America. Everybody else says Lieutenant in the English-speaking world. He died. Well, he disappeared on February 26, 1945. And allow me. So, and why do I bring
That's
up?
That's about 6 months after the war. Why would he disappear?
Well, no, this is in 1945, so the war is still very much going on.
No, George, war ends in 1945. War ends in what, April, May of 1945.
Correct.
You said this is December of 45?
Okay, Millard Fillmore Harmon Jr., his dates were the 19th of January, 1888, died on February the 26th, 1945. So
okay.
February.
Yeah, so February, that's before the end of the war. Okay, pardon me.
Okay, so he was supposed to be heading to the Marshall Islands, and he flew out of Hickam, then what was then Hickam Field in the Hawaiian Territories. And he was at odds with the leadership. He was at odds with Roosevelt. He was at odds with George Marshall. He was at odds with Bombs Away LeMay, Curtis LeMay.
He was at odds with all the Freemasons running the military at the time for the benefit of the Pope. FDR, filthy, wicked George C. Marshall, that 33rd degree Freemason, Scottish Rite Freemason, who participated in the oversight of the murder of Patton, along with Wild Bill Donovan. And then who else? Bombs Away LeMay, another 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason promoting the Cold War and the airborne nuclear war hoax. A cigar smoking, arrogant, awful individual. Go ahead.
Okay, so now, granted, Harmon was not perfect. He was almost certainly a Freemason, but he was unhappy with the direction of war because he didn't. Even though he was in the Pacific, he was not a big fan of the bombing campaign of Germany, and he also wasn't a big fan of the bombing campaign of Japan. Now, that had been going on by the time of his death, but it didn't really pick up until after his death, basically the spring and summer of 1945, especially when you talk about the incendiary bombing of Tokyo. He said Japan was almost defeated. There was really no purpose for this. Now, as I said, he disappeared.
And Japan offered to surrender 6 months before the bombings.
Okay.
Offered a formal surrender, and it was ignored. Yep.
Okay.
Because the Jesuits had to create their airborne nuclear war hoax and their Cold War hoax. So you have to do the bombing in Japan to do that. And plus, Japan had to be paid back for the 200 years they expelled the Jesuits now. They need payback. And so they used their Holy Roman 14th Amendment, corporate fascist, socialist, communist American empire, financed by the Post-Federal Reserve Bank, to build a huge colossus of a military to then bomb Japan and Germany, two ancient enemies of the Jesuits, to smithereens.
Okay, so the initial report was that Harmon's plane was shot down by Japanese planes. But turns out that wasn't the case because there weren't any Japanese planes probably within 1,000 miles of where the plane was crashed. So they said, there must have been some sort of defect with the plane, but it received a thorough inspection the day before. It had plenty of fuel. There was nothing wrong with it. So it just, accidents happen. Oh, well, move along. Nothing to see here.
Yeah, it's just a coincidence. And all these generals and all these admirals and all these other men of martial power just happened to get killed. Yamamoto wanted to surrender in 1943. He said the giant has awoken and Japan is finished. And if we want to survive, we need to surrender before we get under attack. So it just so happened that he was shot down by P-38s and I forget what place in the Pacific. So that was the end of any real sane attempt to surrender and to put an end to the war. Can't do that now.
Okay, so this is not academic. This is borderline shaggy dog. I've known this fellow named Steve from my local cafe. We used to hang. He's a Catholic, but he's a semi-liberal, semi-conservative Catholic. In that, among other things, he was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. He was a warrant officer. And I've had a number of conversations with Steve over the years. And interestingly enough, the ironic thing is that we agree on most things, which is sad. But we're talking about Gary Francis Power, the so-called U-2 pilot. And we weren't talking about what he did back in the early 1960s, how he was allegedly shot down over Russia or Ukraine or wherever it was.
And then Oswald was blamed. He gave the technology to the Russians to shoot down Powers, which is nonsense. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm not going to address that. I was going to talk about his death in 1977.
Right.
So after Powers got out of the CIA, well, okay, he never left the CIA. I just want to say that for the record. He actually changed jobs with the CIA.
And remember, Fletcher Prouty said in his great book, JFK, he said that Gary Powers, U-2 ran out of gas. That's why it went down. It was never shot down. It ran out of gas. So that was done deliberately to stop the Cold War negotiation, or the atomic weapons they had with Khrushchev. But go ahead.
Okay, so Powers officially left the CIA. He quote left the CIA, close quote. And he decided to go into the civilian world, and he became a helicopter pilot for different TV stations in the U.S. And his last gig was for KTLA in Los Angeles, where he covered traffic and fires and things like that. I don't have the date in front of me, but in 1977, he was doing, covering a fire or something, and his helicopter ran out of fuel and he crashed. Well, I remember, I know I brought this up to you before. I remember talking to my dad about that, and who was in the Air Force. He was not a pilot, although he did actually get a commercial pilot. I'm sorry. He got a civilian pilot. He flew a Piper Cub. And my dad told me specifically, that story, as they say in Texas, that dog won't hunt.
That dog won't hunt. That's right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, having been in the Air Force for over 20 years, and Powers was in the Air Force, or flew for probably well 25 years as a civilian and in the Air Force. There's at least two things you're always concerned about. One, to make sure you have enough fuel, and two, make sure you're not overweight, because you need to be able to make sure that you can get from point A to point B safely. That is why you do something called a pre-flight inspection. That's why you go over every inch of your vehicle. You look for the wires, you look for leaks or any other oddities. And so that's something. So my dad.
So Gary Powers just got into that airplane and didn't know he was low on fuel and just took off, right?
Well, yes, that's the story. Well, according to Steve, he said, hey, that happened all the time in Vietnam. Pilots didn't monitor their fuel and they crashed. Now,
that's what you have a ground crew for. The ground crew is supposed to monitor all that. And then you're not taking off unless you got a full tank. Go ahead.
Okay, so it's possible that Powers made a mistake, but that seems highly unlikely with decades of experience under his belt.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right, my brother.
And so, and of course, it's possible that this general in the Pacific, Harmon, Millard Harmon, maybe his pilot was incompetent, maybe the mechanic was incompetent. Although, as I said, there's nothing wrong with this craft. Okay, so I've been dancing around about this, and this is pure speculation on my part. And you're talking about something that took place almost 80 years ago. How do I know what happened? I don't, because I wasn't there. I can only surmise. So I guess Harmon just simply was not following orders. End of question, and he had to be dealt with.
Well, yes, sure. Happens all the time. James Angleton told Joseph Trento, in the book that he wrote on Angleton, and it's quoted in another book I was reading called Mary's Mosaic. Angleton said that we in the CIA killed thousands of people. And he said, and the men that were responsible for it have gone to hell. And he said, and I guess I'm going to be there shortly. That's all in the book Mary's Mosaic by that author. It's a tremendous work. I have it on my shelf. Just finished it a couple months ago. And that's right. So they're killing people all the time, George. It's how That's how Romanism governs. They govern, everything's tempered by assassination. That's why they have the CIA, mafia shooters, all working together. And I told you I knew a CIA long-distance sniper that taught mafia shooters. So the CIA working with the mafia together, and the Jesuits can pick which organization they want to call on to carry out an assassination. They do it all the time.
Well, technically speaking, the CIA apologies for them was, hey, we don't kill people. Other people do it for us. That's what the mafia is for, or the Green Berets, or the SEALs, or the Mossad, or whomever they have to use.
You always want to remember that William J. Casey, Knight of Malta, head of the CIA, was the personal friend of an army officer who was also in the Gambino crime family, whose name was Albert Vincent Carone. Both of them were Knights of Malta. One was Mafia, one was CIA. And when the daughter of Albert Vincent Carone was married, they had a separation of the different peoples. You had the CIA guys in one room, you had the Mafia in the other room. All this is documented. So they all work together, and they just decide which assassins we're going to use for this particular instance.
And depending on what they need to get done, where it is, that sort of thing. Whether you're talking about a politician like a senator, a governor, prime minister, or you're talking about a general, or
an entertainer. We got to get rid of the entertainer. Michael Jackson is, he's talking too much now, so we're just going to get rid of him. And we'll use a black Freemason to kill him. Prince, he's talking a little bit too much now. We're going to get rid of him. And they do it all the time. They just do it all the time. And the people here are so dumbed down and so mesmerized and think that they run the country and that their vote counts. It's all nonsense. That's what you have when you have military government. Everybody's dumbed down to nothing. And the public schools are controlled by the federal military government to make sure you teach the little enemy belligerents exactly what we want them to know and nothing more. That's the way it is. That's why we're advocating, George, that a state or a county needs to declare its independence so we can get back to some sanity with civilian government and get rid of these secret societies. They're not allowed in our country.
Oh, amen. Well, I don't want to overload the audience with too much information. However, there are a couple other points I think I should make. Now, you said,
trying to behave myself, George, and I won't say anymore. Go ahead.
Okay, don't make promises you can't keep.
Yeah, my wife tells me that.
Well, what do they say? Well, dear, shame on me for lying to you. Shame on you for believing me.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm listening.
Okay, so so you said you've never heard of Millard Harmon or Frank Andrews before?
The only Millard I ever heard of, George, was Millard Fillmore.
Oh, yes.
So,
if you, the great Eric John Phelps,
yeah, right. Okay. Flattery will get you everywhere, George.
Flattery the author of Vatican Assassins. I'd imagine the general public and most of your audience had never heard of these people. And because I thought you're on top of these things. And
well, that's why I have you, George. That's why I have you, to keep me updated and make sure I haven't missed anything. So that's your importance, okay?
Okay. So for some reason, these people have been written out of the history books. I guess, well, you don't need to learn about them.
Yep. When you're controlling a population and regulating what they're taught, you decide what they don't need to know and what they do need to know to be good, subordinate, U.S. citizens, enemy belligerents under Trading with the Enemy Act, Emergency Banking Relief Act. And so that's what you do. That's why we have the Department of Education in Washington, which should never exist. Education should be on a state level. But those socialist, communist, Jesuit, secret knights in Washington make sure that the schools are going to teach their little curriculum.
Well, all right. So I just wanted to bring up, one or two other things. Now, you said you had never heard of Frank Andrews and Millard Harmon before, and which is surprising. And I know you and I will talk off air, usually at least once a week. So, do you have any idea who William Fife Nolan was?
No, I don't.
Okay, which is also surprising. Now, William Fife Nolan lived from the 26th of June, 1908, died on February 23rd, 1974. So he was 55 years old at the time of his, 55 years old at the time of his death. Okay, so who exactly was Bill Nolan? Well, the Nolans were a fairly prominent American family going back to the 19th century. They had a number of Nolans involved with politics, and they started the Oakland Tribune in California.
The Oakland Tribune, I remember that. Growing up there. Yeah. Sacramento Bee, the Oakland Tribune, with the Richmond, what was the Richmond? I can't remember that. Yeah, I remember the Oakland Tribune.
Okay, so why do I bring him up? Well, as I said, he was born in 1908, so he got his
Richmond Independent. Pardon me, George, that's what it was. Richmond Independent. Go ahead, George.
Okay, so Nolan got his undergraduate degree from the University of California, Berkeley in 1929, where he's a member of Zeta Chi and the Order of the Golden Bear. Now, I mentioned the Order of the Golden Bear before because it basically is the West Coast version of Skull and Bones. Now, it's not quite as elite, but they're very discriminating in terms of their membership. A number of prominent members were Robert McNamara.
Robert Strange McNamara. That was his middle name, Strange.
Well, I believe the Strange came from Scotland, but
yes, it was a family Strange, but he was strange.
Yes, he was.
Most notorious liar too. As you mentioned, Knight of Malta and wonderful orchestrator of the loss of the Vietnam War at the cost of 60,000 American soldiers, vast majority being white. Because remember, 98% of all combat deaths are white men. Go ahead.
Okay, so he is a member of the Order of the Golden Bear, which is a Skull and Bones like organization. So he was also U.S. Senator from California from 1945 to 1959. He was appointed by then Governor Earl Warren after the death of Hiram Johnson. So why am I bringing him up, and why am I talking about somebody who died half a century ago, 1974? Well, even though he was a junior member of the Senate, he immediately ensconced himself into the Intelligence Committee and the Finance Committee. And so he basically approved financing for the Cold War, specifically the creation of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and this almost endless spending on all these bases in Europe and in the Far East and the rest of the world.
Now, who are we talking about now, George?
William Nolan.
William Nolan. No, it sounds like a good Irish Catholic. And I would imagine he's a knight of some sort. William Nolan. Nolan.
Well, actually, Knoll is no land. Knowland. No land.
I see. Okay.
So he could be of Irish descent.
I don't know. But he did all those things, facilitated the Cold War, and
yes.
Mm-hmm.
However,
and he was a friend of Earl Warren, you say?
Well, at least an acquaintance of Earl Warren, because Warren appointed him to be a senator after the death of Hiram Johnson.
Mm-hmm. That's the same Earl Warren of the Warren Report that covered up the true assassination of the Kennedy assassination? Is that the same Warren?
One and the same.
Is that the same Earl Warren that whose court took Bible reading and prayer out of the public schools in 62 and 63. Is that the same Earl Warren?
One and the same.
Okay. Is that the same Earl Warren when he was governor of California and 33rd degree Freemason that set up the containment camps for the Japanese Americans out of California? Is that the same Earl Warren that did that?
Well, actually, that was just before he took office, because Earl Warren was governor of California from 43 to 53. He left the he left the governorship to join the Supreme Court, where he did a wonderful job.
Which is a wonderful job of destroying the place. The Warren Court destroyed the country. Is he the one that okayed all the pornography under the First Amendment, freedom of speech, with the 1967 case? Is that the same Earl Warren?
One and the same.
One and the same. Okay, that's the same Earl Warren Court that did away with all the interracial marriage laws in the states and then validated all the interracial marriage that could take place. Is that the same Earl Warren that did away with those laws?
Well, yes. In his defense, he was just simply interpreting the Constitution in a very charitable way.
Yeah, well, it was never meant to be read. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the same Earl Warren that has destroyed the country, and he was a horrible justice that did it in the 60s, and he has the great boast of being a white man, which is a disgrace, and a Saxon, and a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason. So he was one of the Pope's powerful members of the international white power structure run by the Pope. So, good old Earl Warren. But go ahead, George. I didn't mean to get you off track. We'll just go a little longer because I'm having fun with you today. Go ahead.
Oh well. So after he left the Senate, he went back to the Oakland Tribune and became an editor there. And I guess he retired by the 1970s. So anyhow, by
that time, Oakland was savage black, baby. I grew up there. My grandparents lived in Foothill Boulevard in Oakland. And there was all kinds of black savagery in Oakland, drove the whites out of town. So Mr. Nolan got a little taste of hateful black racism when he was in Oakland. Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, indeed. So I guess he got depressed on, I guess, February 23rd, 1974, so just over 50 years ago. And he went to basically, not quite my backyard, but to Glen Ellen, California. Glen Ellen, California, and blew his brains out.
Well, maybe he has some genuine sorrow over all the sin that he had brought about. Or maybe he was going to start to talk and someone else blew his brains out. But, the wages of sin is death. God, be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever man soweth, that shall he also reap. So that was his reaping for something that he had done probably over the years.
Okay, I'm sorry. Did I say Glen Ellen? I meant to say Guerneville. Guerneville is just outside of Bohemian Grove, and it has a population probably of less than 1,000 people, and that seems like
is that where he killed himself?
Correct.
Yeah, well, he was probably a Grover. Yeah. Yep. He probably came to the realization that these guys run everything, and there are no elections, and we have no say in what happens. We're just intellectual prostitutes. And maybe he came to that realization and said, okay, I've had enough. When he should have repented and believed the gospel and had his sins forgiven upon believing Christ died for his sins, was buried and rose again.
Well, or it's possible he could have had some help.
That's more possible than anything. Mm-hmm.
Because maybe he is going to talk. Who knows?
Yeah. So you want to talk? We're going to give you the treatment we gave General Patton, or we're going to give you the treatment we gave Jack Kennedy, and or with the treatment we gave James Forrestal when we threw him out of a 16th floor building in Bethesda Naval Hospital. And just if you want to talk, we have all sorts of things reserved for you. After all, we made you, and since we made you, we can unmake you. So that's one of their justifications for assassination.
Yes. And I'm just looking this up. Who was the governor before. Oh yes, Colbert Olson was the governor of California during the Japanese internment.
Mm-hmm. Well, Warren facilitated. He kept it up. He could have released them because there's not one recorded case of Japanese American treason. Not one.
However, Warren was the Attorney General of California during the Japanese internment.
Oh, then he facilitated it, the Wicked Center. And the Japanese in California, they had the most beautiful farms. My mother lived in Gilroy, and there were Japanese children that were in her class, and she said they would bring the most delicious strawberries to class. And then they had their farms taken from them by the Roman Catholics in California, and they were sent off to the internment camps. And they lost their farms, they lost everything. That's good Roman Catholic government. At a District of Columbia, which is the capital for the commander-in-chief serving the Pope under military government. So I would say the Japanese would know that it's the Pope's military government in District of Columbia that did this to them during World War II.
Yep. Yes, indeed. So there again, just as like you'd never heard of these generals like Harmon or Andrews, you had never heard of the senator, William Nolan.
No. He's an important one, George, and I'm thankful that you illuminated me on that.
Well, and something else I forgot to mention about Nolan is he was actually in the Army in World War II. He rose to the rank of major, so he was involved with Army intelligence. So he almost, okay, there again, I'm speculating here, and so forgive me. He almost certainly would have crossed paths with Donovan and people like that.
Sure. Who knows what paths he crossed, but I'll tell you, by virtue of his subsequent life, he had to cross somebody's path, because you don't get in places of power like that without somebody helping you.
Well, so I've talked about some figures that lived decades ago, 50 years ago, and almost 80 years ago. But I'd like to talk about somebody who just died 5 years ago, back in 2019. And you could say, in a sense, he was in a similar league as Nolan, although he, technically speaking, was never involved with politics. But in terms of creating the world in which we now live. So specifically, would like to bring up Don Valentine. Do you have any idea who he was?
No, I don't.
Okay, so Donald Thomas Valentine lived from the 26th of June, 1932, died on October the 25th, 2019, so just almost 5 years ago. So he was 87 years old at the time of his death. He is from New York originally. He attended Mount St. Michael's Catholic Academy in New York City. Then he got his undergrad degree from Fordham.
Goody. So he was a good Catholic, and he was devoted to the Pope, and he got his wonderful Jesuit education to do whatever they want him to do in their 14th Amendment American Empire. So that's great. Okay. So what things did he do for the Jesuits in their American Empire?
So just like with Nolan, he basically set the foundation for the Cold War with the creation of NATO and other things. Also, just before I get back to Valentine, so the period between 1945 and 1950 was a huge transitional era. And you could say that about other epochs. So between that space, 1945, 1950, the whole world was basically turned upside down, so to speak.
It was a worldwide reconstruction. First destruction and then reconstruction along the lines that the Jesuits wanted.
Okay, so in no particular order, you had the creation of the United Nations. Prior to that, it was known as the League of Nations. That was 1945. They actually had their first meeting in San Francisco, but it was moved later on to New York City. You have the creation.
You have Dirty Harry Truman in San Francisco that's facilitating the beginning of the United Nations there.
Yes. So you have the creation of the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, in Atlanta, Georgia. That was established in 1946, or as some put it, the Catholic disease creator.
That's right. So that's a nice little disease creator for we can get all these white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and Baptists, and we're also going to kill these liberal Catholics too. How dare these liberal Catholics think they have a right to own guns or they have a right to free speech? How dare they? So they're going after the liberals and the heretics.
Okay. So you had, as we discussed before, you had the creation of the CAs, the Catholic Intelligence Committee, the Catholic in Action, Catholic Invisible Army, also known as Central Intelligence Agency, in 1947 on September the 18th. Now, 6 days prior to that, on the 12th, you had the creation of the United States Air Force, which hitherto had been part of the Army. Now, I realize this is not in terms of creation, but 1946 is also a big year because you had the birth of three future presidents: Bill Clinton on August the 19th, George Walker Bush on July the 6th, and Donald John Trump Sr. on June the 14th.
Three wonderful Jesuit coadjutors, groomed for the day that they would be president.
Oh, okay, so you also have the creation of the World Health Organization in 1948. I believe that was April the 4th. You also on April the 4th, if I'm not mistaken, or the 7th, you had the official creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Okay, that's what I was in for 3.5 years in Germany. We're in NATO, and we're ready to fight the invasion of the Soviets because the Soviets are planning to invade Europe, and we're going to be there to stop them. That's all trash. Just Russia was a trash heap after World War II. How many people they lose? 50 million people. There's major cities were just sacked. They were no threat to America. It's all a lie, every last bit of it. Go ahead.
Well, I know we've discussed it before. Well, one of the major arguments for the creation of NATO and for the CIA was to, well, make sure we don't have another Pearl Harbor. Also,
yeah, another Pearl Harbor caused by FDR and the high admirals and the Jesuits running the place. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
by the way, I had a student. I don't know if I mentioned this to you, George. His name is Sean King. He runs a big car lot and car dealership in New York, and he took my tax class. He said, "Yeah, Eric." He said, "We were talking about various sundry things." He said, "Yeah." He said, "You know, John Ford was at Pearl Harbor the day it was attacked." I said, "You kidding?" He said, "Oh no, Knight of Malta, John Ford, the big photographer for the order, was ordered to be in Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, to be there for the attack so he could film it."
Well, and so Jack definitely made the round. So in addition to being at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, he was also in the English Channel on June the 6th, 1944.
Oh, okay. So he was at Normandy invasion too, huh?
Yes. Now he was also there with Spellman and with Walsh.
I know. Oh, was Walsh there too?
Yes.
Walsh was at Normandy invasion.
Yes.
Well, it makes perfect sense because Walsh is telling Spellman what to do. Because Spellman was educated by Jesuits in Rome at the American College. So Spellman, Walsh, and John Ford all there at Normandy.
Oh, yes.
Trio.
Well, I mentioned John Ford before. Now, do you know, did you, not to date yourself, but did you ever watch the old TV show Gunsmoke?
Of course. We love Gunsmoke with James Arness and a great big gun he had on his side, and Miss Kitty, and who was the other one? Festus, yeah.
Okay, well, Ken Hagen played several roles on the show, but he's best known as Festus Hagen. Well, he was actually John Ford's son-in-law.
What? Festus was John Ford's son-in-law?
Correct.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So it's just like a small world. So anyhow,
respect for Jesuit theater, you know.
Well, and of course, James Arness, was an apostate Freemasonic Methodist, along with brother Peter Graves, who played Jim Phelps.
That's right. Mr. Phelps, did you decide to accept Yeah, we watched Mission Impossible too. Yeah, where they used a black man, Greg Morris, as the smartest guy in the room. He did all the technical work and all the bombs and all the electrical to give the idea, that they have a supremacy. That's Hollywood. Go ahead.
And of course, yeah, I don't mean to belabor this, but of course they had to throw in a few token Jews like Leonard Nimoy and Martin Landau, and the original leader was Stephen Hill. I forgot his character's name, but he's Jewish, so they had to make it Black, Jewish, and Catholic.
It's just what the Ku Klux Klan warned about in the early 20s. Ku Klux, the black, the Catholics, and the Jews taking over everything. But the Ku Klux Klan was controlled, Masonic, revived in 1913. Wasn't the old Klan, but that's right. So they had legitimate grievances, but no one listened.
Okay, so before we end this, I probably should get back to Don Valentine. So what is the punchline? So you could say, when it comes to, say, technology, you could say that Don Valentine was basically the version of Bill Nolan, because he was considered to be the godfather of Silicon Valley. And because in 1972, he had moved to Southern California, the South Bay, just south of San Francisco, and he founded Sequoia Capital. Well, all right. Let me rephrase that. The CIA, through Don Valentine, founded Sequoia Capital.
You said Sequoia Capital?
Correct.
What's that? Is that an investment house or what?
Well, basically, they finance startups in basically Santa Clara County, Silicon Valley.
Good old Jesuit University of Santa Clara in Silicon Valley. So would you think there's a Jesuit influence there in Silicon Valley, George?
That sounds like an unfounded conspiracy theory. But anyhow, getting... Okay, so, yeah, however, prior to... I need to back up with Don Valentine. So prior to establishing Sequoia Capital, he worked for a number of other companies, including Raytheon, Veritol Semiconductor, and National Semiconductor.
Raytheon was a big missile builder, big weapons company. When I was in the Air Force, we had AIM-7s. They were called Sparrows, and they worked on a Doppler effect, and those were made by Raytheon. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so by the early 1970s, he had moved to California, to the South Bay, just south of San Francisco and near San Jose. And and by the way, when they say that people like, Bill Gates founded Microsoft, that's a complete canard. No, he didn't. The CIA used him as a front man to create Microsoft or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Just like...
look at his wife. I mean, relation to a Jesuit. So he was a perfect little gimp to use to create Microsoft.
Okay, it's just like was it Elon Musk? He doesn't run Twitter or X or whatever they're calling it these days. He's just simply a CIA frontman. That's
and as I understand it, his father was a German Nazi. That was Werner von Braun. I can't prove that, but I would sure like to see a DNA test given to that young man.
Okay, so I understand that Musk is from South Africa originally.
Well, there was Nazis that went to South Africa. There were Nazis that went to South Africa. I mean, who knows? It's absolutely possible, and you don't get in a position of power that Elon Musk is in without being in the group, in the white power structure.
Okay, so getting back to Don Valentine, so he basically, Sequoia Capital, they ended up selling their interest to Warner Communications, and
is that like Time Warner? Is that like Time Warner, George?
Yes.
Yeah. Remember, Henry Robinson Luce was an out of Malta that controlled Time and Warner. So the Knights still run it.
Okay, so over the last half century, actually probably going back to early 21st century, these are some of the corporations that Sequoia has financed. Atari, the video game manufacturer, Apple Computer, um, Oracle Corporation, Cisco, Netflix, YouTube, uh, Google, 23andMe. So basically, all your big Sun Microsoft, Sun Microsystems. So basically, all your big tech platforms the last half century.
Wow. And who is the gentleman that helped finance all this, George?
Don Valentine.
Don Valentine.
Who was?
Did you find any connection with him with the Knight of Malta or Constantinian Order or something like that?
I have not, but that would not surprise me. But as I said, he got his undergrad degree from Fordham, and he went to Mount St. Michael's Academy.
If he helped finance all those mega corporations run by the Jesuits, then he most assuredly was a coadjutor of some sort, member of secret society. And is this the guy that committed suicide?
No. That was actually the ex-senator, William Nolan. Yeah. He ostensibly died of natural causes back in 2019.
Gotcha. I see. Okay. See, George, what we need to have is we need to have our own news station where we can report these kinds of things. And you'll be my correspondent in the field, and I'll have a couple others, Eric Rodriguez and Vlad and a few other guys. And they'll be the correspondents in the field, and you can do all this footwork. And I think I have Brother Stephen Drake, too. So there's a whole bunch of guys who would be doing some wonderful footwork and finding all these things, and then we can have our bi-weekly broadcast and update the people as to what's really happening. Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, yes, it would be. Now, something I don't have in my hopper is something I've been doing for the last year or so is locally they have something called SoCo Chat, Sonoma County Chat. And the main host of it is a fellow by the name of Paul Gullickson. He used to work for a local newspaper. So he'll spend about half an hour talking to prominent people in the community. And he's spoken to a number of other politicians and bureaucrats and people like that. And I guess a few weeks ago, he was talking to the chairman of the Board of Supervisors, Chris Kersey. Now, I mentioned Kersey to you before, but just as a quick reminder, Chris Kersey is 68 years old. He was born on November 21st, 1954. He was born in Denver, Colorado. His father was career Army, so he's almost certainly has an intelligence background, or his father does. So Chris went to Regis High School in Aurora, Colorado, which is outside of Denver, and that's Jesuit. Not to be confused with Regis High School in Manhattan, New York, where Anthony Fauci went, among others.
Yeah, so this is Regis University in Denver, right?
Well, yes, there's Regis University, and there's also Regis Prep School, which is a feeder for the university.
And the Jesuits are busy swarming in all the Venezuelan alien invaders into Denver. Denver's turning into a mess. And the Jesuits want that. So they're facilitating all that.
Okay, so why am I bringing up Chris Kersey again? Well, I have an update because he's recently on this broadcast. Now, just to give you his background, as I said, he got his undergrad degree from, I believe, Boulder State or something, a secular degree. So then, I guess, after he got out of college, he moved to California and he got the job with my local communist rag, the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, or papal, or is it Papal Demon Rat? How do you say it? And I remember, yes. So he employed as a reporter, later columnist for the paper from 1980 to 2007. And I remember reading his columns on a regular basis. And man, he was like an uber hardcore leftist, communist, socialist, fascist, Nazi thug. I don't mean to be unsure. Okay, there I go again.
So remember the fascists are right wing, the communists are left wing. Okay, so which was he, George?
Yes. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, because they both work together. Thank you.
Okay. So do you mean the fascists are pseudo-conservatives? And
yes, the fascists are pseudo-conservatives.
Okay.
That's how they came to power in with Hitler's Nazi party. And the communists, they want to have change. And
okay, so I remember reading some of his columns over the years where he basically think of every so-called stereotype about so-called leftists or liberals about the Second Amendment or abortion, whatever. Yes, he means all those stereotypes. So he was married for something like 30 years, but his wife developed breast cancer, and so they said he wrote about this column. So we're going to treat it aggressively. We're going to do whatever the doctors tell us to do.
yeah, we're going to cut off her beautiful breasts. Is that what he did?
Yes, but it still didn't save her. So
still parasites and fungus. That's why. You reverse the parasite with killing off the parasites, killing the fungus, and killing the cancer cells. Once you kill those three, you don't have cancer. Go ahead.
Okay, so she died relatively young. She wasn't even 6 years old when she died. Growing as a teenager, I thought 30 was old, but now that I'm closer to 60 than I am to 50, and hey, 60 is not that old. But
wait till you turn 70, George.
Oh yeah,
and that's a real revelation.
Well, 80 is not that old, but
it's true. It isn't. Only 10 years from it. Hopefully, I'll make it.
Now dead. Now that's old. But anyhow,
George, killing me.
Okay. Anyhow, so he turned it. So he was a famous. So not to pick on Chris, but he decided to turn. Even though he's an Irish Roman Catholic, he decided to turn his wife over to the medical Inquisition.
To the Holy Office of the Medical Inquisition. That's right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they decided. So these quacks murdered his wife.
We're going to cut her, we're going to burn her, and we're going to drug her. That's what we're going to do. Give her a nice, slow, painful death.
And
like we did in the Dark Ages when we had the Inquisition.
Okay, so anyhow, so he was all he joined the board of supervisors back in 2021. And so after he left the paper, he did some other things, but he got into politics. He was in the Santa Rosa City Council in California. Then he became the mayor of Santa Rosa from 2016 to 2018. And finally, he joined the board of supervisors. Now, he was all on board with the whole Corona hoax tyranny. You name it, mask requirements, vaccine requirements, you name it. So I guess he did learn his lesson about.
Did he get his injection? Did he get his boosters? Did he do all his stuff now that he need to do?
Well, I guess. He said he's taking the shot. I
don't believe that for 1 second. No more than Trump took it. No more than Biden took it. No more than Anthony Hopkins took it. None of those people took it. They just pretended that they did, so they can lead the way with all the people to get your house.
Sorry, are you talking about Hopkins or Fauci?
Anthony Hopkins. There's a video of him taking the shot, and the nurse takes the syringe and squirts the stuff in the air, and then sticks it in his arm, and he's got a mask on. He's looking at the camera like, do you sense that this is a fraud? But yeah, it's a video you can watch. Anthony Hopkins getting the Jesuit jab.
Okay. So I confused Anthony Fauci, the great medical inquisitor. And of course, something I brought up to you before, there's a video of the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, getting his shot. And I guess he's taken off his top shirt and he has his t-shirt on. But he has, when he's apparently receiving or allegedly receiving a shot, he has, I guess, a Maltese cross tattooed on his upper left arm.
Is that right?
Now, as I said, that doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Well, it means all kinds of things. It's not a Malta.
Well, when he went to his tattoo parlor, he said, hey, I was thinking about getting something like maybe my mom's name or a flower or a snake, or hey, what's that? Oh, it's a Knight of Malta cross. Really? What's that? I've never heard of that. Yeah, that
heard of that because his daddy was one.
Oh, are you talking about Fidel or Pierre?
Both of them.
Oh. Okay. Well, we know that Fidel was a high-level Freemason. I wouldn't doubt he was a Knight of Malta as well.
No doubt he was a knight, sure. I mean,
Yes.
who would report it in Havana? Cuba was a closed country for any freedom of the press.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Although,
He helped run the drug trade for the Pope and all that. Yep.
well, something I mentioned to you before is Margaret Trudeau, Justin's mom. I know she's an upstanding and virtuous woman.
That's right. She was a wonderful professional lady of the night for famous men. That's what she was.
Well, I'd rather go with the upstanding and virtuous woman. I'll go behind door number 2. Anyhow, so she may have she may have had the occasional dalliance with several members of the Rolling Stone, except for Mick Jagger, Lou Rawls, the black singer, Jack Nicholson, Ted Kennedy, Fidel Castro. Basically, the entire national hockey team for Canada. And it's just like, I mean, her fornication was virtuosic. I mean, she. So, anyhow, she was a regular. The Trudeaus were a regular guest of the Castros in the 1960s and 70s.
Yep.
And there's a picture of young Justin when he was a baby, being held by Uncle Fidel.
Is that right? There's a picture of him holding his offspring there. I'll be beaming with pride.
Okay, I know this may sound a little bit salacious, but for what it's worth, okay, Fidel was supposed to be 6'3". Justin is 6'2". Margaret, his mom, is 5'8". Pierre, his purported father, Margaret is 5'6", and his purported father, was 5'8". Now, you could have discrepancy in heights, but he was almost, if you look at a clean-shaven Fidel Castro, he bears an uncanny resemblance to Fidel. And remember
Absolutely, without a doubt. Well, that's probably why the son, young Trudeau, got all of his communist policies from his daddy. And don't you think Fidel didn't have regular visits visiting his son too?
Oh, because Canada never had an embargo against Cuba.
That's right. Canadians could go into Cuba anytime they wanted
to. Okay. And but as I said, one of the reported lovers of Margaret Trudeau was Jack Nicholson. And remember, he played the psycho colonel in A Few Good Men.
Right.
And do you remember the scene where he says, I live 300 yards away from men who are trying to kill me?
Mm-hmm.
And you need men like me to keep our country safe, from enemies, which is ironic because Jack Nicholson is a flaming communist.
Sure. Oh yeah. Well, the good Catholic that he was. Vast majority of these Catholics are all left-wing socialist communists. That's why I read my book on what was it, John Knox's the Reformation in Scotland, and the commentator says, had not the Puritans won, had not the Calvinist Puritans won, Calvinists, whatever you want to call them, we would be lost to Rome. We would either be Romanists or socialists. That's what he says. That's right. Socialism is Romanism. And all socialism leads to communism. Karl Marx was tutored by Peter Becks, who became the Jesuit general, according to Bismarck. I mean, communism perfected by the Jesuits in Paraguay. Nobody can doubt that communism, socialism is absolute Romanism. So they don't have a middle class. There's no Catholic country that has a middle class, unless that money was given to them or by historic white Protestant nations. So,
okay, so we've been going on for an hour and a half. Do you mind if I just bring out one last point?
One last thing, George. Okay.
Okay, so I'll probably have to flesh this out in different streams because I'm not going to be able to do it justice. But something I've been interested in a while. I've been interested in a number of topics, but one is so-called serial killers / mass murderers. Now, I know that may sound macabre, and yes, it is. But growing up, I just thought these people were perfectly, these events, these killers, were organic. They had a screw loose.
That's what I wanted to talk about. Son of Sam. Go ahead, George.
Okay. So I guess you'll probably have to squeeze this stream to be a little bit longer than you were planning. Okay. So you want to talk about the so-called Son of Sam?
George, the book for you and for the listeners is titled The Ultimate Evil, The Search for the Sons of Sam by Maury, M-A-U-R-Y, Terry, T-E-R-R-Y. It's a very well-written book. Caused me to write to Mr. Berkowitz in prison. He's my age. And he sent me a letter back. And David Berkowitz, and it's back in 2021. So maybe we'll cover the Son of Sam on another broadcast. But
okay, so probably the next one, because we've been on over an hour and a half.
That's right. It's all your fault, George. So I'm going to blame you.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess guilty as charged. But so are you saying we'll have to flesh out the whole Son of Sam situation?
Yeah, we'll do some. We'll have Son of Sam with that topic on another broadcast.
Okay.
So if you want to give the summation, George, and your contact information, then we'll go.
All right. So if people have any questions, comments, or concerns, critiques, if they like to cover a topic or go over a topic again, please email me at georgewidger1969. GEORWIDGER1969 GEORWID1969 If they didn't get that, they can get it from you, brother. I also want to go back to the 1960s and talk about popular music.
Okay, we'll do that next time. Okay, George? We'll do it next time. Okay. All right, Brother George, thanks for being with us today, with me and with the listeners. And this is Eric John Phelps, 24/7 World Radio, with my podcast that I have on weekly with Brother George. You can contact me at rbpbchurch at comcast.net if you want to send an email. And you can send your gift to rbpbdonate at comcast.net. Or you can send a gift to me at Cash App, ERICJONPHELPS, which is the Cash App name, Eric John Phelps. Or you can send a check to RBT, P.O. Box 306, Newmantown, Pennsylvania, 17073. Always appreciate your gifts. It keeps me going here, keeps us going with, so we can continue to have these broadcasts. And I'll be dealing with some more new topics that I think you'll find very interesting. So thank you for tuning in. May the Lord bless you to do his will according to his word. Please pray for us 2 minutes a day, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting, remembering that whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved, namely believing that Jesus Christ died for your sins, was buried and rose again, and upon true repentance towards God and faith in Christ of what he accomplished at the cross and his resurrection, the Lord will save you and forgive you all of your sins, which is the most important thing that could ever happen to you, the salvation of your soul and the forgiveness of your sins. That's really, at the end of the day, all that matters. So until we meet next time, may the Lord bless. Maranatha.
Well, God bless, brother.